Hello, I'm Noel Kingsbury, and with Annie Gelfoyle, together we run Garden Masterclass. Welcome to our YouTube channel. We put here the recordings from the session we do every Thursday evening at 6 o'clock London time, a practice we started during the April 2020 lockdown as a way of reaching out to the global garden and landscape community. We hope you enjoy this recording, but also please do check out our website for all the amazing range of information-packed webinar and workshop recordings we have. Maybe consider joining us because members get access to our vast archive of free material as well as discounts on the webinar recordings. We've also recently started a podcast channel on Substack. So we do a weekly podcast so that's a way of accessing a lot of our recorded material that you can listen to whilst you're digging or driving or watering or whatever else. So I very much hope you enjoy this recording and looking forward to keeping in contact.
Hey, welcome everybody. I've been away. I don't suppose anybody's noticed that I've been away. So I've missed the last 3 weeks because I've been gadding around New Zealand, and I make no apologies whatsoever because it was amazing. It was the trip of a lifetime. I cannot get over it. So beautiful. I want to go back immediately. So that's it. And there are quite a few interesting interviews around the country that we will hopefully be sharing with you soon on podcasts if I can get them across to Noel for him to turn them into podcasts. Anyway, it was a wonderful, wonderful country, and I was over there to speak for the Garden Marlborough Festival, which is a lovely, lovely event, incredibly well organised. Gosh, and so if anybody is heading to New Zealand in the sort of early November of next year, you could go and visit it. That's in Blenheim, in the Marlborough district, which is lovely, which is good wine country. Anyway, just to say what's coming up soon. We've got a webinar because we're well into webinar season now. We've got a Euphorbias with Don Whitten, who's a national collection holder. We've got Mr. James Hitchmo doing a talk about design versus management, which is very thought-provoking. And we've got Matt Pottage doing life after Leylandii, and Matt is very keen on his conifers and as he is on his variegated plants. That takes us up to about Christmas, and we've actually got January through to March webinars on the website, so have a look because we've got some really interesting series coming up, 2 or 3 sort of 3-parters, so have a little peruse through there. You also might be aware or not that we are now doing podcasts. We're churning our podcasts out. We're a little bit late to the podcast party, but better late than never. And you can find the podcasts. Thank you, Jenny. Thumbs up. That's nice. You can find the podcast through our homepage, or you can go to Substack and search for us there. But it's been good fun doing that. And then just before I hand over to Noel, I don't know if any of you who are signed in have subscribed to Scribehound, but Noel and I are part of the jolly team of writers who have joined the band, the Scribehound band. And what this means is that every day, literally every day, you get an article come through that you can either read or listen to. I have to say, I opt for the listen to option because it's so nice to hear people read out what they've written, and some wonderful voices. And for example, this morning's was Anderton talking about Gertrude Jekyll and visiting Munstead Wood and having a sort of life was, I think it's Gertrude Jekyll speaking to her from the grave or something like that. Anyway, it was really, really entertaining, as only Arit can be. But do have a look for Scribehound. It really is great. And they also have a deal for the awful Black Friday. But there is a sign-up deal, so it might be worth taking advantage of that. So I think that's all the housekeeping, Noel. I don't think there's anything. Have I forgotten anything? Because I have got jet lag, so I might be a little bit.
So Substack, Scribehound. Oh yes, I some time ago, few weeks ago, launched my online perennial directory, which is
yes.
the URL is perennialdirectory.org. It's free at the moment. I'm very keen for people to see it and comment on it. It won't be free forever, although of course Garden Masterclass members will get will get a nice discount. But I'm keen for people to see that. So should I introduce tonight's guest?
I think so. Yeah.
Tonight's guest is Stephen Anderton, who is, I think, somebody who has been the garden correspondent for the Times of London for 33 years. Is certainly somebody we should describe as extremely distinguished. However, my abiding memory of Stephen Anderton is seeing him wrestle Anna Pavord to the ground
Lord.
stage at an event in Herefordshire some years ago. And I think in terms of explaining Stephen's behaviour, his CV starts off with the National Youth Theatre and a classics and drama degree, which rather impressed me. This is a man of many aspects. So tell us.
I think we need to hear why you wrestled Anna Pavord to think
we deserve an explanation on that first. Yes,
absolutely.
Quite right, Annie. Yes.
Explain.
Well, there are probably many actually, but I'm trying very hard to think why it was.
Many people who wrestle to the ground.
It was probably because I know the event. I was doing a session of what I call cabaret songs, and I rather think that was the song where the compost accelerant gets the better of the compost heap and tries to take over the world. Am I right?
Quite possibly, yes.
I think
compost was definitely involved.
Yeah, well, I think it got the better of Anna Pavord, and the compost heap has to be shot.
Yes.
And just when you think it's all over, it comes up again and gets Anna Pavord.
Did she take it in the spirit that it was intended?
I think so. Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
It was definitely an edgy moment for the audience.
Oh, I'd say.
Well, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
My kids are terrified about that song, I'll tell you, because there's a moment when the compost heap has to drink the compost accelerant, and they were actually terrified that I was drinking something poisonous, and it's still in their minds. Anyway, there we are.
So great, a gardener, a horticulturalist with a drama degree. Have you done much other acting?
Here and there, on and off. I was interested in music as much as anything else. I've always written music. I've written, I suppose, what you would call a musical rather, words and music for local consumption, and worked with a composer friend of mine on various choral and orchestral things. Again, usually contributing things which are the sort of lighter end of the spectrum. He rewrote Secular Requiem a couple of years back, Russell Pascoe, which was performed in Truro Cathedral.
Oh, wow.
And my section of it is turning out to have a life of its own and being requested at all kinds of funerals.
Oh, gosh, wow.
Which is fun.
Yeah.
And I was in South Africa a month ago and was having to deal with requests to see if it had copyright and could it be used elsewhere just for the words. So that's nice. It's good.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations. Yeah. So, you first came, I think, to the prominence of many people in the garden world when you were working at Belsay Hall in Northumberland, which I recall was a sort of a big garden restoration project. So, could you tell us about Belsay?
Surely, yeah. Well, it was really the first plantsman's garden, I suppose, that English Heritage had. They got it in 85 and English Heritage began in 84, you know, so it was all very new to them. And bless them, I won't say they didn't know what they were doing, but it was a big exploration for them. And Elizabeth Banks was on the project to start with, and I worked with her and was there 10 years seeing it through. And very exciting it was. And it's a marvelous place because it's a mixture of 19th, 20th century plantsmanship, but also that artificially created picturesque ravine landscape. And I lived on site for most of that time, although latterly I was doing a much wider regional job. So it was good to see it through. And English Heritage was an organisation that had to develop its systems of staffing for gardeners from scratch, really. I forget what my title was when I began there, but it was something weird in the buildings trade. You wouldn't believe it. It was all, but the whole gardening system had to grow. So it was very interesting.
Yeah. So you then went on to work for English Heritage, who, with the National Trust, are one of the two main organisations that own or oversee the management of British heritage gardens. And so you mentioned developing systems at Belsay. How did you find working for English Heritage?
Well, it has its frustrations, far fewer then, I suspect, than it has developed since, because, you know, as I say, it was new to gardens and we were feeling our way along.
Yeah.
I guess both those organizations have had their problems, you know. I mean, the garden side of it back then, and we're talking 80s, 90s, had a degree more independence under the Gardens Advisory System than it does now. And the Gardens system is owes rather more to the administrative and money side of it, you know, the site managerial side of it, than it used to. And I don't know whether that is quite as happy as it used to be. I spent a lot of my time when I was National Gardens Manager trying to get the gardens out from under the buildings side into the curatorial and archaeological stream of the organisation, so that they could be recognised for their long-term care, because they were writing management plans, you know. And I think that's all been slightly undone since, which drives you bonkers. But it's the same in the trust, you know. Their gardeners gradually came under property managers, and it's caused a lot of frustration. So, it's the way of the world at the moment.
Yes. So we should have asked you earlier, really, how you made the transition from studying classics and drama to landscape. What got you fired up about plants and gardens and landscape originally?
Oh, it was very easy, really. I mean, I was a country boy and I couldn't, I loved the theatre, but I couldn't stand actors. And I don't know that I can still, really. You know, I'm a very sort of, I'm probably just much too blunt for actors, really, for acting. And I've always been fascinated by stage design and space and that side of it. And I thought that's probably where I was going. And I got onto that landscape design course at Birmingham Poly, part-time post-grad. And with that degree, I could not get a landscape office job, surprise, surprise. So I did it from a gardening job. at Abbott's Ripton Hall in Cambridge, which was wonderful because it was very private gardening. They were spending money hand over fist. It was fabulous. And I met all kinds of people passing through, great names of gardening of the time. And it was the most wonderful, it was very civic course. It wasn't garden design, it was landscape design. It was most wonderful, rigorous training in space making, you know. And I'd recommend that sort of training to anybody. But I also thought there was a guy teaching the course who said you can be a great landscape designer if you know 50 plants inside out. And I thought, Jesus, this is not for me, because I was doing it from a garden where I was just learning, you know, 50 new plants every day, not properly, but, you know, meeting them.
Yes.
And I thought, I can't do that. So I stayed with gardening and plants, and, you know, you might say that the rest is my history. That's what I wanted to be.
Do you think sorry, I was going to say, do you think there's a link between theatre and gardens? I mean, theatre design, garden design. Do you see any links with creating a sort of?
Oh, not terribly close, but I always think, you know, that so many of the best garden designers are career changers who come from some kind of plastic arts, you know, and so many of the best garden designers or landscape architects have been architects. You know, I mean, I think having a feel for all that is so important. And although it doesn't relate directly to stage design, I think having a feel for what I call space making is terribly, terribly important. And is a very different thing from planting design. I get stick for this, but I do like to separate those. I'd quite like to separate garden designers into space makers and planting designers, you know. I mean, you don't have to be ruthless about the separation, but there's very few people who really, really, really can do both.
Interesting.
And,
yes,
nothing wrong with that. But
no.
people seem to be offended if you classify them mostly into
I
one
think
or
that's
the
very
other.
realistic.
It's a terrible shame.
I have always felt that. I mean, I think
Good.
yes, I remember being the very first SGD conference I was asked to speak at, which was quite a long time ago. And I remember going there and coming away thinking, I've got nothing in common with these people. And I suppose that the die was cast. And no, I think that is true. It's the two, if the two work together, or you know, landscape architects working with planting people, yes, you can have some fantastic collaborations, but there tends to be, well, I mean, that public assumption, I think, does not help our business, and the tendency of, well, I don't know, perhaps more amongst landscape architects and garden designers, that people think that they know about space making, oh, you know, the plants can look after themselves. But you know, I think horticulturalists deserve a bit more kind of respect, I think, in terms of being pulled in on a consultancy basis. No, it's interesting to hear you say that. So
I always say to people, to amateur gardeners, you know, who have made fantastic gardens just by instinct.
Yes.
Why didn't you have half a day from a landscape architect first?
Yes.
Sort out those damn cars, you know, and where you're going to do the drive, and just do a few basics, because they always get that wrong.
Yeah.
You know, if you've done the mechanics around the house, got that right, somebody else's skill, then everything else you've done fantastically. But you know, you don't realize what you don't know sometimes.
Yes, that's very true.
It's really worth doing, recognizing the different skills. Sorry, you were going to say.
So I mean, I think I was just going to throw in, actually, on this business of stage design and garden design. I mean, I think we Brits, because we've had the kind of, we're still, you know, in the kind of post capability brown 18th century landscape, frame of mind. Now, continental Europe, stage design and garden design were really intimately linked. If you think about all those formal French and Italian gardens and coulisses they were very much more interchangeable. But of course, 18th century, we threw all that out of the window as we took the
Ripped out the hedging.
ripped out the hedges and took the lawn and the sheep right up to the ha-ha. So now when did you start writing for the Times, and how came you got that lucky little job?
Well, I was asked. I'm ridiculously lucky, really. I started writing in the county magazine in Northumberland, and odds and ends, and then what came next? I was a good friend of Christopher Lloyd, which is how I came to write his biography, and I think he probably put in a word for me, and I got the odd corner on Country Life, the odd piece, Gardens in the North. And from that, before I'd wrestled her to the ground, Anna Pavord said, would I do her weeks off on the Independent? So I was doing that. I was doing about 6 a year, which I didn't do for terribly long. Did I do a couple of years of that? And then the Times came along, and that was the time when papers were expanding and Saturday editions were big and new and fat like a Sunday.
And they were throwing so much money at us, weren't they?
Well, it was different times, And I was approached and said, would I do some nuts and bolts stuff weekly rather than 6 slots a year, and I thought, well, of course I will. So I did. And I started the same week as George Plumtree did. And he was doing a main article and I was doing all the sort of nuts and bolts stuff. And George did that for a while. Can't remember how long, something like that. And then he finished and I took over. And I've been doing a feature and nuts and bolts ever since. And there was a time when I was doing a feature and nuts and bolts and a sort of top of the head piece and something else. I mean, there was a time when I was doing 4 units a week and 2 columns for other magazines and one-offs for other magazines. I mean, I had at least one deadline every day of the week at one point in the 90s. It was fantastic.
Yes.
I've been sucked dry, but it was wonderful. You love it.
You never realize you're in a golden age until the golden age is over, do you?
Probably not, except that I've been telling everybody for years that we are in the golden age of gardens right now. And we are. And in fact, we're coming out of it, actually. We've had it.
Do you think so? That's an interesting perspective. I mean, I would have said the golden age of gardens would have been the high Victorian era, actually.
Would you?
I would. I was for Britain, certainly. And France, Belgium, Germany, kind of perhaps a couple of decades later, but that sort of turn of the 1920s.
I wouldn't, definitely wouldn't, because there's so much that's good that's happened since.
Oh yes.
And then it all got in a mess because of the wars.
Yeah.
And then it all got mended, and the best of them were funded and repaired. And by about 1990, we had great examples of practically everything in history, all in good nick. And everybody had cars, so they could go and see them at a reasonable price. And they were fantastically maintained. And it's not going to happen again, because there won't be that kind of money in the common man's purse again. I very much doubt.
Until we see AI-driven weeding robots.
Well, maybe. Yeah, who knows?
Who knows?
I hope so.
And Stephen, were your weekly Times articles? Could you choose what you want to write about, or were you directed? I mean, or was it up to you?
Oh, it's varied enormously over the years. I mean, that's a long time to be there, and gardening's moved from section to section. We've been in the glossy and different kinds of weekends, but I'm now next to wine and sex.
Of course, yes.
So, things change. And there's two of us on the page these days, permanent. Well, they've often been two, but different kinds of two. And I'm next to Joe Swift these days. And with there's two of you, you've got to do a lot of forward planning. So, I put my ideas forward and we get things organized a month in advance, so I know what I'm doing. But no, I put my ideas forward and we take it from there,
Yeah.
But 20 years ago, it was much more to do with people and places than it is now, and that's the way of the world. In all garden writing, it's much more to do with gardening at the moment than people and places. And I guess that's a symptom of the success of 20 and 30 years of mad keen publishing of all those successfully exposed gardens.
Yes,
There's only so many new ones can be made to a high standard.
Yes. So to take you back to your publications, I remember reading your marvelous bio of Christopher Lloyd. So that must have been fun to write. I mean, how did you? Obviously, you knew him quite well, but was that based on a lot of having to interview him and get out, get the kind of information you wanted?
Well, it was a funny old thing. I mean, he asked me to do it and promptly died.
Oh,
we'd had a couple of meetings and sort of rough chats about it.
Yes.
And then he died. So that made it harder and easier. But the house is just riddled with family information. I knew him well, and I knew the world, his world, and the people he knew, and so on. So I was quite comfortable about who to talk to and all that side of it. So
and they kept all the family letters, didn't they? So I was just there this week teaching, and Carol was saying that they'll open a drawer and find a whole stack of still findings tucked away, and all the letters are there and all maintained. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose what was a surprise was the extent to which it had to be really as much a family story as his story. Roy Strong, I told Roy Strong I was doing it, and he said, "Well, that'll be boring."
But anything that's not to do with Roy Strong,
but
really boring, isn't it?
But
the only thing in the world worth of it is Roy Strong.
Think about it, Noel, though. What did Christo do? He didn't do anything, did he? He stayed at Dixter gardening, and he had a few foreign trips and went to Scotland every summer, and that was it. I mean, in terms of a life, he didn't actually do a lot. So I could see where he was coming from, and yet it was a fantastic set of relationships with that family. And that's what made it. And his influence and the quality of his writing did make it a very good story. And the family relationships were extraordinary. And people have said they sat down and read it at sitting to me, which I found very flattering. That's great. That's what you want out of a biography.
Yeah. And wasn't it true that he had one brother that he didn't speak to, and they shared a room?
Well, I don't know about didn't speak to, but they were a funny lot. They were fun. I mean, Christo's mother was a very, very difficult woman, and one way or another, they all spent their lives, trying to get away from her. with varying degrees of success.
Mm.
Was,
She was very proud of being related to Oliver Cromwell, wasn't she?
yeah, yeah, very
She was.
distantly.
Yeah, yeah. But what an honour to be asked by Christo himself to do that. I mean, I think that's rather than just a publisher coming to you. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it was lovely. It's good. And
Yeah.
I wish he hadn't died quite so soon, because it would have been very different. Well, it wouldn't have been so different. A mutual friend of his and mine said afterwards, you know, what would Christo have thought of it? And he said he would probably have hated the first half about his mother and the family, and would have said to the second half, well, his life after her death, you know, fair enough.
Yeah.
Because the people who knew her did kind of love her, but she was one of those people, and you'll know what I mean, who could be very kind to people, but it was a kindness that always cost you more to repay than it did her to give.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting. We've had a couple of questions actually come through to say, how did you form a relationship with Christo? Where did that start?
It started because when I was in Northumberland, he had a friend in Hexham, near Hexham, who he used to stay with on his Scottish holiday every year on the journey north. And he used to break his journey there, and he came to see Belsay while we were staying there, and then he started staying with us on the journey north, and I would go down to Dixter, and thereafter Judith and I used to go to Glyndebourne with him practically every year. It was marvellous.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. How nice. Gosh.
So amongst your other titles, you've done, I remember, a book, Rejuvenating Gardens, which I remember at the time thinking, gosh, this is a much needed book. So much garden literature at the time seemed to be kind of assuming, you know, you start off with a kind of blank slate. People more often than not are actually inheriting a garden that may or may not be in a good state. And I kind of assume that writing that book came out of your experience at Belsay, but maybe not.
Yeah, it did. Well, that was when I did it, and it did really.
Yeah.
That plus just the pleasure of, you know, hacking things about. I mean, if you know what I mean. You learn so much from having to deal with things severely. Sound like a schoolmaster at Eton, don't I? You know what I mean? Very often you don't get that privilege, and it leaves you with a lot to pass on, I think. Yeah, I think that's about right. A lot out of Belsay. And Brodsworth. Was that? I think I might have written it before Brodsworth, because Brodsworth is the other big restoration project I did in the north.
Right.
It's a fascinating place. Another a high Victorian garden.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Could you tell us a bit more about that, actually, Brodsworth?
Well, Brodsworth was 1860s Italianate mansion, and you know, garden restoration has its fashions, and house restoration has its fashions, and things had changed a bit from Belsay, and this had been lived in till the very last minute. And the idea there was going to be preserve as found indoors, including, you know, pinning up the peeling wallpaper, having repaired the underlying problems. But you can't do that with a garden, because, you know, the spaces shrink as the trees grow over the years. So we inevitably had to do hugely more hacking about outside, which was quite hard for the architects to understand. You can imagine. But yeah, it's made a good garden, and we having done all that hacking, fortunately, we were going back to a very clipped, very unfashionable Victorian dumpy,
Yes.
you know, stumpy dumpy look.
Mm.
So it was quite straightforward to go back to
Yes,
that
yes.
kind of effect from heavy pruning,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's worked
yeah.
well.
Yeah, great. Great. So now I know you're very keen to talk about the Professional Gardens Trust, which is a body you've been involved with, heavily involved with. So PGT, do tell us, please, about what their mission is.
Well, yes, gardeners, not gardens. I'm fairly new to it rather than heavily involved in the past, but yes, it's an organization which is small and perfectly formed, as I like to say. It exists to help gardeners who are already gardening, professional gardeners, to further their training when they are struggling to find the funds to do it. So in effect, we're an organization that tries to provide grants
Right.
to further gardeners in service, as it used to be
Yes,
called,
yes.
training, you know. So people apply to us and we'll look at their application and say, well, this looks like a sensible course for this
Yeah.
person to be doing. We'll give you so much towards it. And it's been going for 20 years now. We were 20 years old this
All
year.
right. Yeah, great, great.
And it sprang from Professional Gardeners Guild
Yes.
originally,
Yes, yes.
which is contact organization for professional gardeners again. And they set it up really and gave quid each
Quidditch.
per year, £1 each
Right, right.
per year,
Yeah.
and said this money can go towards training for gardeners in work. And then because it was going to have to be a charity, it was spread more broadly than just members. So it became there for something for gardeners anywhere to apply to. And since then, we have begun to draw funds from other gardening charities,
Yes.
Finnish Scott Trust, National Garden Scheme, some from the RHS,
Yeah.
different sources, so that we now can fund. In all those years, we've funded nearly 800 gardeners.
Wow.
Gosh, yeah, amazing.
Which
Gosh,
is, it's quite something. And you know, as time goes by, even large organizations which have training funds are scaling back their training budgets desperately at the moment. So the need for us is greater than ever.
And what's your role there, Stephen? What do you do?
Mine personally is as chairman. That's as I came in just earlier in the year.
Yeah.
And it will be, I think, as you know, trying to broaden our fundraising, because this year we have actually given away as much as we've got to give.
Right.
We should be taking applications again from January.
Yeah, yeah.
But this year we've spent up, partly because the cost of courses, to add insult to injury, is rising very rapidly.
Well, yes,
It means that people wanting to do courses find themselves more stretched to do it. And you know, we get applications for all different kinds of courses, occasionally for M-Hort courses, which is terrific. People wanting to do that kind of serious, you know. And then on the other hand, people wanting to do chainsaw training, particularly in Scotland, which is terrific because you're keeping people doing on the ground gardening, which is what it's about. You know, that's what we're there for. We're not training garden designers, we're training gardeners.
Yeah.
And so and chainsaw courses, because they're small numbers are always expensive courses, and we can still help.
Yes.
So it's a good thing to be helping people stay in the industry.
Right. Yes. Could you perhaps tell us about any case studies of people you've been able to help and the things they've gone on to do?
Well, yes. One of the guys is at Dyffryn Gardens down in Cardiff, which is a National Trust garden. And he's head gardener there now, Chris Flynn. This is all before my time because I'm very new to it. And we helped fund his tree inspection course.
Yes.
And I took the Professional Gardeners Guild South Wales study tour down there. When was it? Just after lockdown, just before lockdown. And I organised this tour, and he took them round. And I didn't know him. It was before my PGT time. And I have never been so impressed with a head gardener in my life.
Wow.
So I was so pleased that he was one of ours, because you meet different kinds of head gardeners. But there was this guy who knew all about grant applications nationally and internationally, and the latest Latin name, and who was working where on his staff, at which point in the garden today and next week, and who was running the cafeteria today, and which people on this tour he already knew. Every aspect of that garden was at his fingertips.
Wow.
It was just so impressive. It's wonderful. And when you meet people like that in the industry and you think you're helping them get into a position of a job like that's great.
Yeah.
And then, equally with things like the chainsaw courses where you're just helping people move up the steps through the ladder, they're all important.
Yeah.
Good.
So presumably there's somebody within the trust who's fundraising, basically. So, because you might have bodies that give you money, but presumably there's somebody also trying to find more donors as well, I would have thought.
Within our trust.
Yeah.
Well, it's a tiny body.
Yeah.
At the moment, there's 9 of us, and we're all volunteers. We have one paid administrator handling the applications. And at the moment, we've been getting by applying to organisations, other charities that give money. But one of the things I want to do coming in now is start to look at further sources of funding and perhaps commercial funding, because that hasn't been done yet, and it's something that now does have to be done.
Yeah. But do you not get people, individuals donating money, bequests, that kind of thing, or not?
It hasn't happened yet. It hasn't been looked for, and that's now got to happen.
Yeah.
Yes. So I was talking to Ursula Buchan the other week, who was saying about the Valerie Trust being
they've been very, very good to us, and they were the first real chunk of money that came our way after the Professional Gardeners Guild got us going, which was marvelous.
Yes.
Terrific. And they still do support us very well.
Yeah. So tell us about your own garden.
Well, I'm, as I like to say, stuck up a mountain. Not quite as bad as that. I also like to say I'm 2.5 hours from Hammersmith. South Wales, Black Mountains. And I'm the lucky owner of 30 acres, 15 of oak woodland, old oak coppice, which we manage for moss and tree trunks, and nothing else.
Yes.
Moss and light and shade and tree trunks.
Yes.
Which, and everybody thinks there's nothing done, whereas we do actually weed it of Christmas trees and hollies and all of that, but it doesn't look like it. And ivy and bracken. And not it's not perfect, but it is pretty amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it's a very sloping site. And then we have, I don't know, an acre and a half around the house of very, very intense. I don't know what you call it. You've described it as cottage gardening, I know, but it's a sort of very, very intense mixture of wind tolerant clipped shrubs and perennials.
Yeah.
And I don't go in for the wispy wild look here because I'm surrounded by the wild.
Yes,
And
yes,
gardens live on contrast, you know,
yes,
and you
yes.
can't see it from anywhere else.
Mm.
So it doesn't have to relate to the wild. It just has to contrast. So it's not, nor is it a kind of trendy exotic garden, but it is a very, very hard-working garden of perennials and grasses. But many of them are, you know, modern, and many of them aren't. I don't like to get into all this modern business. I can't be bothered with it. There's more to life. You just look at plants, never mind all that. But I've just been in South Africa for a month talking, and it's extraordinary how many of the things here are that sort of feinboss, wind-tolerant look.
Yeah, yes, yes. Oh, interesting.
It's great.
Interesting you should say about being surrounded by the wild. As I moved around New Zealand, I did interviews with various gardeners who've got extraordinary gardens in extraordinary locations with the most amazing backdrops. And each one of them I asked, why do we bother gardening when you're surrounded by this beautiful landscape? What do you think? Why do you think that is, that we feel the need to create a garden, and yet we've got, you know, not all of us have, obviously, but with extraordinary landscapes, you know, on the doorstep. Have you got any ideas about that?
Well, I suppose there's always the sense that a really wild landscape, and especially a landscape that drops away as mine does, is more of a threat than a promise. And I think that old business of defensible space and all that, you know, and making somewhere comfortable around a house is never going to go away. You know, it's just vital. And having made that, you're going to dress it somehow or other with plants if you're a gardener. I mean, you know, you look at the most awful holiday cottage and it's always got some ghastly deck with a fence, you know, and you can call that a garden if you will. But then if you go to a really, I mean, for instance, on the other side of my house where I look across the valley, I have made a completely gradual transition to the landscape through humps and bumps of hedging and echoing what's on the other side of the valley. So I've actually worked quite hard with it there to not see a change, as opposed to the other side where all the fuss and flather is. And I wouldn't have them get in the way of each other for £1 million. I think it's terribly important that you don't see all that. And one of the first things I did here was take out all the things that you can see from outside the garden. There was some rhododendron that you could see from across the valley, and that was the first thing I got out. And beautiful white-stemmed birches at the entrance. The 2 white-stemmed birches that I took down straight away because you could tell there was a garden here when you drove past, and I didn't want that.
Right.
It just look ordinary, you know?
Yeah.
If you're going to have garden plants, they should be on the inside. I've always said, sometimes when I'm lecturing, if I'm talking about the garden, I show a picture of, do you remember John Major's underpants?
I haven't seen them as well.
They used to be, he was merciless
It was the Steve
and
Bell cartoon in the Guardian, wasn't it?
tucking his shirt into
Yes.
his underpants, and
Yes.
his waistband showed above his suit trousers.
Yes.
And there were cartoons of him, like Superman, with a
yes.
waistband showing. And I
Yes.
showed a picture of him because gardens get like that, you know, and like daffodils in verges in the countryside.
Oh, yes,
You don't need it. Garden plants should be inside the garden. And I think
That's interesting.
very strongly that, you know, you
Right.
make a garden, but it's kind of, it's part of the house. I think that side of it is very important. And as long as it doesn't splurge out.
But
Now,
do
you
you
did your book on Welsh gardens, didn't you?
Yes.
Yes. And given what you've been saying, but how do you feel that relationship between garden and outside world played out in gardens in Wales? Because Wales has got a lot of spectacular scenery and a, you know, a relatively recent history of garden making in many ways. So whether did you feel that other people were thinking in the same sort of way or not?
Yes, I think so. I mean, one of the treats of coming to Wales is that there are still opportunities to get places which have, you know, so-called unspoilt views, which are, if you like, worth working with, responding to. And even now, you look at all sorts of little houses. People make their windows and make the most of those views, you know, which is nice to see. It's good to see people really appreciating that. Yeah, it is happening a lot, and old Arnie Maynard's doing it like mad at Altibala,
Right.
very gradually. I mean, you know, the transition is being worked very gradually. I love to see, and Christina Shand at Dyffryn Fernant out west, working on that same very gradual transition.
Yeah.
Which is a fascinating thing to do. I don't know whether it's exclusively Welsh thing at all. It's just that there are lots of opportunities to do it here.
Yeah.
And you know, the effect is always so foreshortened. If what you look out onto goes straight back to suburbia, you might as well not bother. I think that's why it perhaps happens a bit more here.
Yeah.
You know, it's worth keeping going with.
Yes.
I think that's probably as much as you can say.
Yeah.
Interesting. We have got a comment stroke question from Jenny, who's in the States, actually. She said, have you participated, as in the trust, have you participated in social media outreach about the programme? There's a woman gardener forum on Facebook that would benefit. It's called Women in Gardening Networking Group and mostly UK membership. Is that something that's in your scope of?
I can't tell you. We've got somebody who is about to take up seriously the mantle of social media, and that again is something we've got to start working on. So yes, you give me that link when we've finished, and we'll
we'll forward that to you.
Yeah. I mean, do you find that there's more demand from gardeners than there is money to give out? Basically, are you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, here we are talking about PGT, and it's important. But if we went mad with advertising, we'd have given everything away by the first quarter of the year.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You know, I wondered how, you know, you almost need to be promoting it to the people who've got the money to give you to help the gardeners rather than.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, we've now got to take on some serious fundraising. Well, it's like all these things. You either do it or you don't.
Yeah.
You know, and it's got by for a lot of years. But the need for it, I think, is growing. That's the crunch.
Yeah.
Because well, A, because large organizations are losing their funding budgets, but B, it's getting harder for people who don't have large organizations even to help. It's getting